Avengers Endgame is the movie event of the year, so naturally I'm in the mood to talk about Marvel. I've already updated my rankings of the MCU heroes and films. You can see that right up here. But now we're going to stop and rank all 33 MCU movie villains from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean Chandler, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your picks for the best and the worst MCU villains. As I go into this, I'm not ranking them based off of their power. I'm just not the right person to do a video like that, but I'm ranking them based off of their intrigue, their character arcs, how well they play into the stories, and how well they've been used inside of this universe. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love it if you would share yours down below. One final thing before we get started, people ask me about the t-shirts that I wear in my videos. A whole lot of them are available in my merch store. The link is down below in the description. If you like some of my shirts, go ahead and check it out and see if there's something there for you. With that said, let's get started. In last place is Malekith from Thor: The Dark World. He is easily the most forgettable and boring villain in the entire MCU. And that's mostly because he's not given a single defining characteristic or personality trait. He's indistinguishable from all of the other dark elves who also have absolutely no personality. So even though they cast one of the actors who played Doctor Who in the role, you'd never know that because there's nothing distinct about the performance or the character at all. If you're struggling with insomnia, just put on any one of Malekith's scenes in the movie that Thor's not in, and you'll be out before the scene's over. Coming in at number 32 is the Mandarin from Iron Man 3. For the first 60% or so of Iron Man 3, he's actually a pretty menacing villain that has this interesting vibe as he's basically just a terrorist. And then it's revealed that he's just a drunken doofus and an actor. I debated whether I should even include him in this list as he's not really a villain, he's just a moron. But because the movie presents him as a villain for over half of the film, I decided to include him. He's just not a very good villain. At number 31 is the Sovereign from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. For the first half of this movie, their antagonism is what drives the plot forward, and then they show up again in the third act of the film. But really, they're victims of Rocket robbing them rather than actual villains inside of the film, but they are treated as bad guys here. But for me, they are just so goofy and they overplay the 80s retro vibe with the sound effects and everything, so that for me, they come off more like a spoof of themselves than actual antagonists. Kicking off our top 30 is the Supreme Intelligence from Captain Marvel. Now, I actually think this is a pretty good idea for a villain inside of the MCU. It was just executed very poorly. We see the Supreme Intelligence as Annette Bening inside of this film, and they have her give this bizarre performance as the Supreme Intelligence that kind of pulled me out of the film. But more importantly, nothing about the Supreme Intelligence plan seems particularly supreme or intelligent, so I don't think it's a particularly good villain at this point. Next up is Sonny Burch from Ant-Man and the Wasp. He's basically just a generic arms dealer who's chasing around our lead characters and posing an ant-sized threat. Not particularly interesting as a villain or an antagonist, but Walton Goggins is always fun to see on screen, so I kind of like him for that reason. Number 28, Suitor from Thor Ragnarok. Now, this is the character that is responsible for Ragnaroking Asgard and bringing forth the apocalypse. He also has some nice banter with Thor at the beginning of Ragnarok, but apocalypse aside, there's really not much here that's interesting. He's just a big monster. Coming in at number 27 is Kaecilius from Doctor Strange, another potentially interesting character with a unique motivation in that he sees the hypocrisy in the actions of the Ancient One and wants to kind of do something about it, but the actual execution of the character just falls flat. The way he's incorporated into the story makes him come off a lot more one-dimensional than he actually is. Also, as much as I like Mads Mikkelsen, there's not enough of his personality and skill set that gets to cut through with the character, so in the end, he's not particularly interesting. Then we've got Yellow Jacket from Ant-Man. In isolation, I kind of actually like this character and the way he ties into the story. And because his character does things like kidnapping Scott Lang's daughter, his actions can kind of sting. The problem here is that his character and the storyline are basically just a rehash of Obediah Stane from Iron Man, and the director has essentially acknowledged this himself. At number 25 is Whiplash from Iron Man 2. This character should be an awesome rival to Tony Stark in that he's brilliant and he creates cool weaponry. But he's stuck in a movie that's overcrowded, and so his character gets literally stuck in a lab for the entire middle of the film where he's just inventing technology and talking about his bird. So another waste of potential. Next is Aldrich Killian from Iron Man 3. He's a decent version of a villain trope that we've seen many times before and we have seen since. But he's not particularly engaging beyond the basic villain trope. Coming in at number 23 is Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, she's not necessarily a villain, but she is an antagonist to our heroes. Her desperation to survive and stop her suffering puts her in opposition to our heroes inside of the film. So while she doesn't necessarily have this big master scheme, she's certainly a foil to our heroes. Number 22 is Taserface from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the character with the coolest name on this entire list. He is as ruthless as he is stupid. Some people might think he's more of a minor character. In a lot of ways he is, but he's also in another way kind of the main villain of the second act of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and his cruelty and the way he treats people is a key ingredient inside of Yondu's redemptive arc, which was one of the best parts of that movie. At number 21 is Dormammu from Doctor Strange. Now, we don't get a whole lot of plot or character here, but he's our introduction to the Dark Realm, which inherently brings a certain amount of intrigue with him and builds certain senses of mysteries and the potential what could happen in the future. And you also get one very catchy and memorable sequence.
Dormammu, I come to bargain.
Bringing us into the top 20 is Ego from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. As much as I love Kurt Russell and the fact that he's in the MCU, I think that Ego is an enormous waste of his talents. The big problem here is, as a character, Ego, for the first 3/4 of the movie, just delivers exposition, takes naps, and plays catch. Just stop and think about all of his dialogue in this movie. 85% of it is just explaining who he is and what he has done. Even as you move into that final climactic battle that's supposed to be celestial, I was very underwhelmed with what happened there. So for me, Ego is just a big, massive disappointment. Next up is Ronan the Accuser from Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain Marvel. Now, I know that this is an unpopular opinion. Yes, I think that Ronan is a better villain than Ego. Generic? Cliche? Absolutely. But he does more than take naps and play catch. He has clear motivations, he gets in on the action from the beginning, and this is a guy that betrayed and turned on Thanos. You gotta give him at least some credit for that. Now, I went into Captain Marvel hoping they were going to make him a much better character and develop his backstory. They didn't. That was one of my biggest disappointments with Captain Marvel, is that they didn't develop Ronan more. And once again, he was just a generic cliche character. But I do think he's more interesting than Ego. Coming in at number 18 is The Other and the Chitauri. Now, this is an example of a villain that what makes them fun for me isn't the fact that they have this compelling backstory or motivation. No, what makes them work for me is that I think they're the best cannon fodder inside of the MCU. What I mean by that is sometimes you just need a big, gigantic army for the Hulk to smash, and I think that final third act battle in the original Avengers is just so much fun, and that's because you get to see these guys get smashed to pieces, and so that's kind of where they're placed here. Number 17 is Abomination from The Incredible Hulk. I think that this is one of the most underrated villains inside of the MCU. Now, he's not a classic villain, but he deserves more credit than he's given. He's a classic example of an evil version of our hero in that he's this soldier that's a warmonger that has a desire for power, and you see that arc throughout the film as he goes from soldier guy into an actual abomination, leading into this third act that's one of the best just fun monster boss fights in the entire MCU with a really bunch of cool moments in it. Then we got Justin Hammer from Iron Man 2. I actually get a good kick out of this character. Sam Rockwell plays him with so much bravado that he's just kind of fun to see on screen as this Tony Stark knockoff that's jealous of what Tony Stark's able to do, and because of that it drives him to do some really stupid things. That's an interesting new way to do a villain inside of this universe. The movie itself, not so great. The character, I wish we'd gotten to see more of him inside of the MCU. And number 15 is Jan Rog from Captain Marvel. While he might not be the most menacing or memorable character on this list, I think he's used very well inside of that film. He's the mentor at the beginning beginning and the villain at the end, and that adds this extra layer of betrayal for his character, but he still respects her, and I think that fits the story that they were telling really nicely. Next is Zola. Now, he's not given a ton of screen time, he's not given a massive character arc, but he is one of the masterminds of Hydra. This guy is responsible essentially for so much of the MCU's villain infrastructure, so you gotta put him at a nice spot on this list. Coming in at number 13 is Ulysses Klaw from Black Panther. They take what could be another generic arms dealer, kind of like Sonny Burch, and they give him this big, vibrant personality that makes him pop out and makes you want to see more of him. Unfortunately, they killed him off so soon, but this is a fun character that steals every scene that he's in. Number 12 is the Red Skull from Captain America: The First Avenger. Captain America's classic villain is brought to the screen by the legendary Hugo Weaving, and this is a character that brings Hydra one of the essential MCU villains inside of the mix here. He's also got big ties to the Infinity Stones, but unfortunately, I think they used him a little bit too often just to deliver exposition. At number 11 is Obediah Stane, Ironmonger from the original Iron Man. I think this is another greatly underappreciated villain inside of the MCU, as he's a proper use of the evil businessman, the evil version of our hero that's the villain by the end of the film. But with that in mind, I think that they didn't use this character to his potential, because I think they should have used him in 2 films and told his origin story throughout the first Iron Man film and then make him the big villain of the second film. I think that 2-story arc could have made him one of the greats of the MCU. Starting our top 10 is Alexander Pierce from Captain America: The Winter Soldier, the great political villain inside of the MCU, kind of the Hydra mastermind working behind the scenes, making all these things that happened inside of Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the MCU happen. While he's not the guy that's going to start throwing punches with Captain America or our Avengers, he is the guy that's causing so much of the trouble for them. Next is Baron Zemo from Captain America: Civil War. He's the great mastermind that managed to tear our entire Avengers apart without needing to throw a single punch. He's a character that for very personal reasons sees the flaws with what they're trying to do and develops some plan and dedicates himself to tearing them down. Coming in at number 8 is the Children of Thanos. Without needing a ton of screen time, these guys make their mark on this film by being these creepy, weird characters, especially our Squidward fellow who just does this little gesture like this and you instantly remember him and he sticks into your brain and you hate these characters. Next up, we've got Ultron from Avengers: Age of Ultron. This is a tricky one for me because certain things about Ultron I think are great. In other ways, I think he was underutilized. At his core is this villain who came about because of Tony Stark's flaws, and even Tony Stark's personality is injected inside of him, and he misinterprets what he's supposed to do and tries to kill everyone on planet Earth. All of that is very cool and interesting. The actual execution, I don't think, lives up to the potential there, and I think they undercut some of how menacing he should be by giving him too much of a sense of humor, but there's a lot of things here that I really enjoy about Ultron. At number 6 is the Winter Soldier from Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, over the years, I've had people tell me that the Winter Soldier is not a villain because it's Bucky, but that's what makes him such an interesting villain. It is Bucky that has been brainwashed and turned into this deadly assassin that has to be stopped. So part of the intrigue here is the conflicted nature of the character, that he's just being controlled by other people, and Captain America is desperately trying to redeem him and bring him back. It's that intrigue and that relationship with Captain America that makes him one of the greats. Kicking off our top 5 is Hela from Thor Ragnarok, played with campy bravado from Cate Blanchett. She makes her mark on the screen as soon as she shows up. But what makes her so interesting to me is all of her ties to Odin's dark past and all the things he did wrong before Thor came about and before the MCU started. Those interesting details about who she is, why she exists, and why she's doing what she's doing makes her this top 5 villain for me. Number 4 is the Vulture from Spider-Man: Homecoming. What makes him so interesting to me is he's not this big villain with this plan to blow up the world or anything like that. No, he's just a guy that feels slighted by the system and decides to break bad because of it. He's just trying to take care of his family. Add into the mix, you've got Michael Keaton playing him with all of his charm, charisma, and that evil dark side that he can bring forward, and you get a great villain. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to share your picks for the best and the worst villains down below in the comment section. Also, after this video, check out this playlist up above with my other MCU rankings of the movies, of the heroes, all of that fun stuff. And also, starting this Saturday, I'm going to rank all 58 theatrically released Marvel movies from all the continuities, the X-Men movies, Spider-Man, MCU, all of it thrown into one massive list. I've been working on this project for 6 months, so I sure hope you'll come back this Saturday to check that out. In third place is Killmonger from Black Panther. Now on this list, we've seen a bunch of psychos and selfish people. What makes Killmonger cut through all the noise is that he's someone that feels personally wronged by Wakanda, as well as legitimate criticisms of the way they've interacted with the rest of the world. So while he is a bit of a psycho himself and does very villainous things throughout the film, there's also just that nugget of truth inside of what he's fighting for, that by the end of the film, he's won a bit of a moral victory and swayed Wakanda and T'Challa. Our runner-up is Loki from a whole bunch of films inside of the MCU. This is one of the most nuanced and developed characters inside of the MCU, as sometimes he's obviously the villain and other times he's the hero, he's the anti-hero. He's constantly switching sides because he's driven by this odd value set where he's trying to make a name for himself, he's trying to be important, but he also still cares about his family and his legacy in the same sense. He might not be the person throwing down in boss fights with a big master scheme, but he's constantly manipulating everyone and working things in the direction that he wants. But in first place is Thanos, the big bad guy of the entire Infinity Saga, whose story has finally come to a close with Endgame. What makes him so interesting is that they spent so much time in Infinity War helping us to understand how this guy came to this insane conclusion that he needed this Infinity Gauntlet to wipe out so much of the galaxy. You actually have kind of some compassion for him and see the brokenness and sadness inside of him as he is this true believer of this bonkers plan. They even show us the hurt and the pain that he felt in having to sacrifice Gamora to gain the Soul Stone. Some people have said he's not quite as interesting in Endgame as he is in Infinity War, and I think that's totally valid because Infinity War is more his story, whereas Endgame is the story of our Avengers defeating him. So where he's developed in one film, he's just the villain in Endgame, and I think that fits both movies really well and serves him as a villain really nicely and makes him the definitive, the best villain inside of the MCU. Remember to check out that playlist right over there with my ranking of the MCU heroes and the films. Remember to come back on Saturday as I start ranking all 58 Marvel films. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.